The first time my alpha humiliated me in public, she did it so gracefully that half the room mistook cruelty for elegance.
She can stand among us.
Vivienne Mercer stood beneath crystal chandeliers, lifted a glass, and announced to a ballroom full of judges, donors, and pack elders that I had become a burden she could no longer carry. No one gasped. No one stopped her. They just watched me like I was the embarrassing final act of a show they had all agreed to enjoy in silence. My name is Selah Rowan. I'm an Omega. And that night, while everyone thought they were watching my life collapse, I was staring at the one mistake Vivienne didn't realize she had made. Because the divorce papers she placed in my hands were not the beginning of my ruin. They were the first loose thread in a scheme that could destroy her name, her company, and everything her powerful family had built. She wanted a public ending. What she got was a court record that would never let her forget my name. Before we get into the story, thank you so much for being here and supporting my channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please tell me in the comments, and also let me know what kind of story you want next. And if you'd like to support me, the best way is by commenting, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel. The first time my female alpha called me a liability, she did it with a smile polished enough to pass for charm. She stood beneath crystal chandeliers in a ballroom full of judges, investors, and pack elders, lifted a champagne glass, and told the city I had become an emotional burden she could no longer afford. No one laughed. That was worse. They only watched me as if humiliation were a performance, and I was the last woman in the room to realize I had already been cast in it. My name is Selah Rowan. I am an Omega, and on the night Vivienne Mercer tried to bury me in public, she had no idea she was handing me the evidence that would destroy her in court. I used to think power had a scent. Old cedar in polished boardrooms, expensive ink, tailored wool. The low electric sharpness of an alpha who never hears the word no spoken at full volume. Then I married Vivienne Mercer, and I learned power also smelled like my own kitchen at 6 in the morning, when she stood behind me in her black silk robe, kissed the back of my neck, and promised I would never have to be afraid again. That was the trick of women like her. They made control sound like safety. They made possession sound like devotion. They made your cage beautiful enough that you thanked them for the lock. When I met Vivienne, I was 23, overworked, underfunded, and finishing a graduate fellowship in legal archiving at Halcyon University. I had one suit that fit well, 2 that almost did, and a part-time job restoring trial records in the basement of the city courthouse. I loved paper in a way other women loved oceans. I loved the weight of it, the age of it, the way one signature could ruin a life and another could save it. Records felt honest to me. Not moral, not fair. Honest. They kept what happened even when people lied about it later. My grandmother had raised me on that belief. Paper remembers. That was her favorite sentence. She ran a tiny legal copying shop on Rowan Street for almost 40 years, printing petitions for women who could not afford private counsel, and keeping a kettle hot for anyone who entered with shaking hands. She used to tell me, "Never trust a woman who is afraid of documentation." At the time, I thought she meant corrupt landlords and cruel creditors. I did not know she also meant beautiful female alphas with clean nails and dangerous promises. I met Vivienne in courtroom 3, while she was still only a rising name instead of a dynasty. She was there to observe a commercial arbitration hearing on behalf of Mercer Holdings, and I was in the records pit with a cart of sealed archives taller than I was. One box split open when I turned too sharply. Folders crashed everywhere. The bailiff swore under his breath. 3 interns pretended not to see me. And then a woman in a charcoal suit crouched beside the mess without hesitation, and started gathering files faster than I could breathe. Her hair was black enough to shine blue beneath courthouse lights. Her face was all fine edges and impossible calm. She stacked the folders by docket number instead of title, which meant she noticed systems quickly. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. "You're sorting appellate's support by date, not subject," she said. I blinked. "Yes?" "It's cleaner." No apology, no condescension, just observation. That was another trick of hers. She made attention feel rare, as if being accurately seen were the same thing as being cherished. By the time I learned the difference, my name was on her marriage certificate. Vivienne courted like a strategist and loved like a siege. Flowers arrived at work, but never to the front desk where women would gossip. She sent them to the records room, tied in brown paper because I once mentioned I hated arrangements that looked too expensive to throw away. She took me to late museum hours because she knew crowds made my skin prickle. She remembered the tea blend that calmed my scent when my cycle turned rough. She listened when I talked about evidentiary chains and damaged registries, as if I were reciting poetry instead of procedure. No one had ever listened to me like that before. Not with patience, not with hunger. Vivienne was an alpha in the oldest and most dangerous sense. She did not chase loudly. She encircled. She learned every entrance to my heart, and then arrived there first, carrying exactly what I had forgotten to ask for. My grandmother distrusted her immediately. "She looks like the kind of woman who thinks mercy is a management style," she muttered after their first dinner. I laughed because I was in love, and in love, women mistake warnings for pessimism. "She adores me," I said. Grandmother snorted into her tea. "That may be true. Adoration is not the same thing as respect." I should have listened. I did not. 3 months later, Vivienne took me to the East River overlook at midnight, placed a velvet box in my palm, and asked me to marry her, as if the answer had already been decided by weather. The ring was vintage platinum, with a square-cut stone surrounded by tiny black diamonds. Too expensive, too cold, too perfect. I said yes before the wind finished moving. That was my first irreversible mistake. Our wedding was small because Vivienne claimed she wanted intimacy. Now I know she wanted control of the guest list. Her mother, Lucasta, did not attend. Her aunt Dahlia did, but spent the entire ceremony looking at me the way women inspect a stain on ivory. My side was smaller. My grandmother, my best friend, Mina Cade, 2 women from the archives department who cried harder than I did. Vivienne held my hands during the vows and stared at me with such steady ferocity that my knees weakened. "You will never stand alone again," she promised. At the time it sounded holy. Later, it sounded territorial. Both readings were true. The first year of our marriage was not a lie. I want to be fair about that. Vivienne did love me, just not in a way that could survive inconvenience. There were mornings when she stood in the kitchen and rolled sleeves, reading acquisition reports while I buttered toast, and I would think no woman on earth had ever been safer than me. There were nights when my heat hit hard and ugly, all nausea and shaking instead of romance, and she sat on the bathroom floor with a damp cloth against the back of my neck until sunrise. She knew how to anchor me. She knew how to lower her voice at the right moment. She knew how to look at me as if every other woman in the city had gone gray. That is the danger of highly competent love. It is efficient enough to feel eternal. The first crack appeared where cracks usually do. Not in bed, not at a party, at dinner. I had made saffron rice and braised lamb because Vivienne texted at noon that she would be home by 7, and the city had been cold all week. I lit candles because I was sentimental then. By 8:15, the food had gone soft. At 9:10, her assistant sent a message saying the board had extended. At 10:27, Vivienne came home smelling like another woman's perfume and stress. Not a romantic perfume. Something sharp and dry from crowded shoulders in a donor room. I was still at the table. She stopped when she saw me. For a second, her face altered. Actual regret flickered. Then discipline returned and smoothed it away. "You should have eaten," she said. "I did," I answered. She glanced at the untouched place setting across from mine and loosened her collar. "I couldn't leave. The acquisition vote shifted." "You always say that like it's weather." Her eyes sharpened. "Selah." There are wives who hear their name in warning and retreat. I was not one of them yet. "It's true," I said. "You never choose work. It always just happens to you." She set her briefcase down harder than necessary. "There are pressures on this company you do not understand." The sentence itself did not hurt me as much as the tone. She said company instead of life. Pressure instead of choice. Understand instead of trust. I asked, "Then help me understand." She went still. For one long moment I thought she might. Instead, she crossed to my chair, rested both hands on the backrest behind me, and kissed my temple. It was the kind of move that looked tender from a distance. Up close, it felt like dismissal. "I'm trying to keep you away from the worst of it," she murmured. There it was, the first time she confused exclusion with care. I should have recognized the shape immediately. I worked in legal records. I knew coercive language better than most women. But it is one thing to catalog patterns, and another to admit you are living inside one. I stood, took my plate to the sink, and said nothing. Vivienne watched me for a while. Then she came behind me, tucked my hair over one shoulder and whispered, "Don't make me choose between peace and survival tonight." She was extraordinary at making me feel cruel for asking for honesty. Another trick. I learned them all eventually. By then it was almost too late. The second crack was Lucasta Mercer. She began appearing in our home like a bad ruling, never announced, never invited by me. Always in cream or silver, with her hair sculpted and her smile immaculate. Lucasta was the kind of older alpha who had never once in her life been forced to repeat herself. People moved before she finished sentences. She talked to me politely, which is to say she spoke as if I were bright, but structurally temporary. At first, her intrusions came wrapped in social obligations. Fundraising lunches, PAC council teas, gallery previews for Mercer Foundation initiatives. Then they became operational. She joined strategy dinners, revised guest lists, commented on my clothing with surgical warmth. "You wear softness well, Selah," she said once, smoothing 2 fingers over my sleeve. "It makes the contrast in Vivienne's image more effective." I smiled because I was raised well. Inside, something small and furious woke up. After she left, I asked Vivienne what my image had to do with her board positioning. Vivienne sighed like a woman being asked to explain gravity. "It's optics." "So I'm optics." "That is not what I said." "It is exactly what you said with better tailoring." Vivienne walked to the bar, poured herself whiskey, and stared into the amber as if it might rescue her from me. "I need you not to fight every battle I'm already fighting." That was another trick. She made her secrecy sound exhausting enough that asking questions looked selfish. The third crack wore heels and a blood-red mouth. Dahlia Kestrel, female alpha, council donor, daughter of old pack money and scandal management. She was exactly the kind of woman Lucasta Mercer would have chosen for Vivienne, had Vivienne not married an Omega archivist instead. Dahlia entered our life first as a name in invitations, then as a face beside Vivienne at industry dinners, and then, far too quickly, as a private joke I was not included in. The first time I saw them together in a way that made my spine go cold, it was at the Blackstone legal benefit. Vivienne was at the center of a donor cluster near the west staircase, and Dahlia leaned in to say something near her ear. Vivienne did not move away. Nothing more happened. No touch, no smile, just stillness. But women like me learn to read absences because that is often where truth hides. Vivienne noticed my stare later in the car. What? I kept my eyes on the passing streetlights. She's comfortable with you. She's on 3 foundation boards. We work together. Do you? Vivienne's hands tightened on the wheel. The city lights carved hard planes along her cheekbones. There is nothing there, Selah. It was the kind of sentence that answers a question before you ask it. I turned to look at her. I didn't accuse you. No, she said quietly, but you were about to. She was right. That is what made it worse. By then I had started hearing things before they were said. I had learned her guilt by its posture. That year the company expanded aggressively, and Vivienne transformed from busy into unreachable. She changed the code to her study. She began using a private legal team I had never met. She took calls on the east balcony after midnight, in a voice so low, I sometimes wondered whether I was imagining the conversations. When I asked what was wrong, she kissed me. When I asked what had changed, she brought me gifts. When I asked if we were still all right, she said, "You're overthinking because you spend too much time around worst-case paperwork." That line should have sent me straight back to my grandmother. Instead, it sent me into silence. I started keeping my own notes: dates, donor names, canceled dinners, unusual travel, late board sessions that never appeared on public calendars. I told myself I was being paranoid. I also told myself that if nothing was wrong, then proving it would calm me. That was the archivist in me. We make lists when our hearts begin to panic. 3 weeks before the gala, I found the first piece of proof. Not proof of an affair, proof of intent. Vivienne's study had always been off-limits in theory, but not in practice. Then suddenly, it became both. New code, new lock, new filings delivered by hand. One afternoon, Lucasta came by early, and I overheard enough through the hallway to hear my own name spoken in the clipped, careful tone women use when discussing risk. I froze in the corridor, hidden by the turn near the library. Lucasta said, "You have delayed this long enough." Vivienne answered too softly for the words to carry. Lucasta replied, "Founders' Night is the cleanest stage for it." After that, the numbers become harder to stabilize. Numbers. Stage. It. Even then, my body understood before my mind did. That night, I waited until Vivienne slept, then went to the study. She had changed the keypad, yes. She had forgotten I spent 2 months of our first year working beside her while she opened it dozens of times. Muscle remembers. So do wives who are frightened enough. Inside the study, everything smelled like cedar and control. The hidden safe behind the jurisprudence shelf took longer. I found it because one of the leather-bound volumes had a scratch pattern different from the rest. Details save lives. My grandmother was right about that, too. Inside the safe were 4 drives, 1 paper file, and a sealed memorandum packet marked internal stabilization. I took 1 drive. Only 1. Enough to know. Not enough, I thought then, to trigger suspicion. I was wrong about the last part. I opened the drive in the downstairs library with a blanket around my shoulders and my pulse trying to break out through my wrists. The first files were financial. Debt exposure moved through shell subsidiaries. Legal settlements rerouted as operational revisions. Nothing I fully understood at 3 a.m. Then came labor compliance reports with Omega scent control violations, hidden under facility maintenance language. Then came the document that made the room tilt. Succession and Public Stabilization Memorandum. Mercer Holdings. Kestrel Advisory. Private circulation only. I read it twice because the first time my brain refused to hold the words in order. There, in elegant bullet points, was the outline of my demolition. Controlled marital dissolution, reputational repositioning, public realignment of executive image, donor reassurance through legacy-compatible union optics. Legacy-compatible union optics. That meant Dahlia. That meant me. I kept reading because once you start breaking, you may as well know what shape the pieces are going to take. My name appeared 7 times. Not as a woman, as a variable, as an emotional volatility factor, as an optics risk, as a negotiation complication. At the bottom of one appendix was the sentence I can still see when I close my eyes. Recommended execution. Preserve alpha credibility. Isolate omega reaction. Finalize narrative in public to prevent private leverage. I laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, because my body did not know what else to do with that much betrayal in one place. Vivienne was planning to end our marriage publicly to prevent me from having private leverage. That told me 2 things. First, she thought I would fight. Second, she knew I had grounds. I copied the files, every one I could access before dawn. I replaced the drive. I returned the study exactly as I found it. Then I went to bed beside my wife and lay awake until morning, while she slept with one hand resting possessively over my waist. Her palm was warm. I have never hated warmth as much as I did then. The week leading to Founders' Night moved like a blade. Vivienne became sweeter. That was the most grotesque part. She brought flowers. She came home early twice. She even took me to lunch on Thursday and reached across the table to brush a crumb from my mouth in that quiet, intimate way she knew made me melt. I stared at her beautiful face and thought, "You are trying to soften the animal before the slaughter." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Paper remembers. And now so did I. Founders' Night was held every year at the Halcyon Grand, a marble and gold monstrosity attached to the Judicial Hall, where judges, donors, council members, and executive families drank each other's reputations neat. I wore blue silk because Vivienne once told me blue made my scent sweeter to her when I was angry. Petty, maybe, but grief sharpens strange instincts. The ballroom glittered. Women moved beneath chandeliers like expensive verdicts. At the far end, beneath the crest of Mercer Holdings, stood my wife. Vivienne in black, of course. One hand around a champagne flute, the other resting lightly against Dahlia Kestrel's bare back. Not hidden, not uncertain, placed. I stopped breathing. The room kept moving. That was what made it obscene. Servers passed silver trays. Music swelled. Donors laughed. Nothing in the world paused to acknowledge that my marriage had just been executed in front of half the city. Then Vivienne saw me. For the smallest instant, I saw something human cross her face. Not love, not shame. Regret at timing. Then she buried it. I walked toward her because if I did not move, I would shatter where I stood. Dahlia turned first. Her smile was thin and bright enough to wound. Vivienne lowered her hand from Dahlia's back, one beat too late. That beat still lives in me. Selah, she said. Just my name. No sweetheart. No wife. No reach of the hand. I looked at Dahlia, then at Vivienne, then at the place on Dahlia's spine where my wife's fingers had been. How long? Dahlia glanced at Vivienne with polite curiosity, as if this were an item she had been told would happen eventually, but not exactly when. Vivienne said, "Not here." The answer was so monstrous in its neatness that I nearly laughed. "Where then?" I asked. "In the memo." Dahlia's smile vanished. Vivienne went white beneath the ballroom lights. There it was, the first real hit. Not my pain, my knowledge. She stepped closer and dropped her voice. "You need to calm down." I could have forgiven almost anything faster than that sentence. Need. Calm. Down. As if I were hysterical. As if she were not standing beneath chandeliers, with my replacement at her shoulder, and legal annihilation waiting in her clutch. "I need," I said softly, "for you to stop speaking to me like you are still the woman who gets to manage my reaction." Around us, the air changed. Not visibly, but people had begun to notice. Lucasta Mercer appeared at once, because of course she did. Women like Lucasta are born with instincts for spectacle. She arrived in silver silk and judicial pearls, immaculate as frost. "Selah," she said with practiced regret, "this is not the moment." "It seems like exactly the moment. You brought witnesses." Lucasta's gaze cooled by one measured degree. Vivienne looked as if she wanted to drag me somewhere private and shake silence into me. Too late. I had already seen the architecture of their plan. Private had ended in the study. Now we were all living in the public version. Lucasta extended a cream folder to Vivienne. Again, not subtle. Again, timed. My stomach dropped, even though I knew what it was. Vivienne took it reluctantly, which would have impressed me if I had not already copied the playbook. She held it out to me and said, with a voice trained for shareholder reassurance, "I was going to tell you after the remarks." Remarks. Not after dinner, not after we got home, after remarks. My marriage had an event slot. The folder rested in her hand between us like a loaded weapon. The orchestra played on. I could feel the whole room pretending not to look. I took the papers. I did not read them all. I had seen enough versions in the files to know the language. Irreconcilable divergence. Mutual reputational strain. Expedited dissolution in the interest of public stability. Mutual. That word almost made me bite through my own tongue. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Vivienne's lashes flickered. For the first time that night, genuine fear touched her face. Not fear for me, fear of miscalculation. "Selah." "Where?" Lucasta said, "Do not create a scene." I looked up at her. "If you wanted dignity, you should have planned better." Then I signed. One line. Perfect. No shaking, no tears. Nothing for them to hold up later as proof that I had always been too emotional for the Mercer name. I closed the folder and handed it back to Vivienne. Then, because revenge had already begun building its spine inside me, I said quietly enough that only the three of them heard. "You should have checked whether the omega you were trying to isolate worked in legal records." Dahlia stiffened. Lucasta's expression actually changed. Vivienne looked as if I had opened her ribs. Good. I wanted that image. I wanted her to carry it. I turned and walked out of the ballroom barefoot. I had kicked off my heels somewhere between the donor tables and the doors and never looked back for them. Outside, the city air hit my face hard and wet. It had started raining. I stood under the stone awning of the Halcyon Grand with blue silk clinging to my knees and legal dissolution papers in my blood. My phone vibrated. Vivienne. Again. 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 I turned it off. Then I called the only woman in the city I trusted to answer the truth before the tone finished. Mina Cade picked up on the second ring. She did not say hello. She said, "Tell me who I need to bury." I almost sobbed with love for her. Instead, I answered, "Meet me at Rowan Copy and bring a laptop." Rowan Copy was still there, though my grandmother had died the previous winter, and the shop had technically been closed since the funeral. I still had the keys. When I unlocked the door, the bells above it gave the same tired little chime they had given every day of my childhood. Paper smell, dust, binding glue, ink. Home. I collapsed behind the front counter and cried harder than I had in years. Not pretty tears. Animal tears. Humiliation tears. Tears for every dinner I had defended, every excuse I had accepted, every warning I had translated into unfairness because I was desperate to remain chosen. Mina found me there half an hour later with my back against the copy paper shelves and my mascara somewhere near my jaw. She took one look at me and set down her bag without a word. Then she crouched, opened her arms, and let me fall into them. Mina smelled like citrus and rain and competent anger. When I could finally breathe, I told her everything. The study, the memorandum, the gala, the folder, the signature, the sentence about legal records. Mina listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Tell me you copied the files." I pulled the drive from my bag. She closed her eyes briefly. "Good girl." I laughed in spite of myself. She pointed at the back room. Coffee, then war. We spent the rest of the night at my grandmother's old layout table going through files. Mina was a litigation strategist for a plaintiff's rights firm and the least sentimental person alive until her friends were harmed. Then she became religion with sharpened nails. She opened the drive, sorted folders by exposure type, and started building a case map on yellow legal pads, like she'd been waiting her whole life for the chance to take down a woman like Vivienne Mercer. By dawn, we had 4 branches: coercive public dissolution, material reputational harm, fraud exposure through suppressed labor compliance, board conspiracy. By mid-morning, Mina had called an Omega rights attorney named Noor Halden and told her, "I have a client, a bloodbath, and a billionaire alpha who thinks documentation is ornamental." Noor arrived in a slate coat and no makeup, with tired eyes, gorgeous self-command, and the kind of quiet that makes powerful women nervous. She shook my hand, listened for 22 minutes without once checking her phone, and then asked the question that changed everything. "Do you want settlement, collapse, or precedent?" Not revenge, not vindication. Precedent. I looked around my grandmother's shop at the copy machines, the paper towers, the staplers sorted into glass jars, the old women's names still written in pencil on archive boxes, waiting to be returned or shredded. Then I said, "I want a ruling so clear every alpha in this city learns not to use public shame as a corporate tool again." Noor's mouth curved very slightly. "Good," she said. "That goal survives appeal." We moved fast, not because I was brave, because delay is a privilege women like Vivienne weaponize. Noor filed an emergency injunction regarding the dissolution's enforceability, citing coercive public execution under unequal power conditions and concealed financial motive. Mina started leaking carefully selected pieces of the labor compliance story to 2 trade reporters who hated Mercer Holdings on principle. I stayed in Rowan Copy with blackout curtains drawn and my grandmother's kettle hissing every hour while we built the structure that would end my marriage properly instead of the way they had staged it. Vivienne did try to reach me, at first through calls, then through flowers, then through handwritten notes tucked beneath the shop door, then through her assistant, then, unbelievably, through concern. One of the notes read, "You left in a storm, and I don't know where you are. Please let me know you're safe." I stared at that line for a very long time. Then I wrote on the back, "You knew exactly where I would go. You just never thought I'd take the evidence with me." I did not send it. Some truths deserve to sit unsatisfied. The first public fracture in their plan came from the financial side. A trade journal ran a cautious feature on Mercer Holdings' irregular liability shielding through minor subsidiaries. No accusations, just questions. Mercer's stock dipped. The second hit 48 hours later when one of Noor's journalists published a piece on suppressed Omega scent control violations in Mercer logistics centers. That one bit harder because women like Lucasta Mercer can weather financial mess. They hate labor scandal. It makes them smell like common predators instead of elevated visionaries. By the time the court scheduled our preliminary hearing, the city had started taking sides. Not moral sides, never that. Interesting sides. PAC elders muttered about tradition. Donors muttered about timing. Advocacy groups called what happened to me ritual humiliation disguised as corporate necessity. A commentator on Halcyon Legal Network called the gala a live execution of marital dignity. I sent that clip to Mina with no message. She replied with 6 black heart emojis and a picture of her sharpening a pencil. Vivienne finally appeared in person on the 5th day. I was in the back room sorting exhibits when the bells rang. Mina looked up from the front desk, saw who it was, and actually smiled. "Look at that," she said. "The defendant arrives." I stepped out slowly. Vivienne stood in the center of the shop in a charcoal coat, hands bare, face drawn tighter than I had ever seen it. Without the ballroom and boardroom lighting, she looked almost young, almost frightened. It did not move me the way it once would have. She took 1 step toward me. Mina said, "Try another, and I bill you for the floor space." Vivienne did not even look at her. Her eyes stayed on me. "Selah." I folded my arms. The silence stretched. Finally, she said, "I need to explain." That sentence expired at the gala. Her throat worked. There was a time when seeing Vivienne Mercer at a loss for words would have felt like winning the moon. Now it just felt late. "Lucasta was forcing the board's hand," she said. "I was trying to manage the least damaging version." I almost laughed. "You brought my divorce to a donor gala." "Yes." She did not flinch from the ugliness. "I know." That caught me slightly off balance, not because I forgave her, because I had expected euphemism. Instead, she stood in my grandmother's shop and let the truth sit between us, unvarnished. "I should have come to you first," she said. "You should have come to me at all." Her eyes closed briefly. "Yes." Mina rose from the desk. "Wow," she said. She discovered honesty after the subpoenas. Vivienne ignored her again. That used to impress me. Now I saw it for what it was. Selective attention. Another form of control. She reached into her coat. Noor, who had entered silently through the back office moments earlier, said, "If that is a document, and you are not serving it through counsel, put it down." Vivienne froze, then slowly withdrew her hand empty. Good. Let her learn a different room. "Tell me what you want," she said to me. The arrogance of it almost stole my breath. Not because it was cruel, because even now she thought resolution would arrive through negotiation with her. I said, "A ruling." Something in her face finally broke. Not visibly to anyone else, but I knew her. I had spent 3 years studying the tiny betrayals of her expression. She had come here hoping for private settlement. Private again. Always private when truth was expensive. Noor stepped beside me. "My client will see you in court." Vivienne looked at her then, for the first time since entering. Recognition flashed. Of course. Noor Halden had already dismantled 2 Alpha-owned property trusts and made 4 senior council wives cry on the public record. Vivienne's voice went flatter. "You're turning this into a spectacle." Noor lifted one brow. "Your client handled the spectacle at a gala. I'm handling the law." Vivienne turned back to me. "Selah, if you do this, Lucasta will go after everything." That line finally gave me what I had needed for days. Clarity without residue. No apology, no grief. A threat disguised as concern. I smiled. My grandmother left me a copy shop and enough stubbornness to weaponize it. Let her try. Vivienne stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Not in agreement, in recognition. She had lost the old version of me. Good. She left without looking back. This time I was the one who did not stop breathing until the door shut. The preliminary hearing was held in courtroom 7, bigger than the room where I had first met her, smaller than the ballroom where she had tried to finish me. Perfect. The city came in suits and silk. Press lined the back wall. Advocacy groups filled the public benches. Lucasta Mercer arrived in winter pearls with Dahlia at her shoulder. Because some women will bring a witness to their own moral decomposition if they think the outfit is strong enough. Vivienne sat between counsel and strategy, black suit immaculate, expression unreadable except to me. I knew where to look. The left hand. Always the left. Vivienne's thumb rubbed once against the edge of her legal pad. Nervous. Good. Noor opened with precision. Not heartbreak. Not betrayal. Power. Public coercion. Material motive. Strategic humiliation. She laid out the memorandum, the timelines, the board language, the labor scandal, and the direct benefit to Mercer image stabilization from dismantling me in front of donors, instead of dealing with me as a spouse in private. Then she did something I had not expected. She asked me to read the sentence from the memorandum aloud. My mouth went dry. But I took the document. My hands did not shake. Recommended execution, I read. Preserve alpha credibility. Isolate omega reaction. Finalize narrative in public to prevent private leverage. You could feel the courtroom change around those words. Not with noise, with recognition. Judges hear cruelty all the time. What shocks them is administration. A monstrous act becomes harder to excuse when it is written in bullet points by women with law degrees. Mercer counsel tried to argue context, board language, strategic shorthand. Noor asked one question that cut the argument clean in half. If the marriage was dissolving in good faith, why was the emotional response of one spouse listed as a risk to be isolated? No good answer followed. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and looked straight at the judge, because my grandmother taught me never to offer truth sideways. I told her about the study, the files, the gala, the folder, the language. I described what it felt like to stand in a ballroom full of the city's most powerful women, and realize your wife had turned your humiliation into part of her investor communications strategy. My voice shook once, only once. I did not hide it. That tremor belonged there. Noor asked, "Why did you sign?" I answered with the truth. Because if I screamed, they would call me unstable. If I begged, they would call me dependent. And if I signed, they would finally have to face me on paper. A murmur moved through the back rows. The judge shut it down immediately. Still, I saw Lucasta's jaw tighten. That gave me more strength than it should have. Then Vivienne testified. I expected half-truths. I expected careful damage control. What I got was worse and better. She told the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Yes, the board had been pressuring her. Yes, public donor confidence had become linked to her private image. Yes, she believed handling the dissolution at Founders' Night would prevent rumors from spiraling. Yes, she had considered Dahlia Kestrel's public adjacency useful in stabilizing perception. No, she had not told me in advance. Why not? That was the question that mattered. Why not? Vivienne looked at the judge, then at the memorandum, then, finally, at me. Because I knew she would fight me with facts, she said. Noor did not let the silence breathe. And that frightened you? Vivienne answered without a pause. Yes. The room went very still. There it was. Not incompatibility. Not irreconcilable differences. Fear. She humiliated me publicly because she feared what I could do privately if I were given the truth. Paper remembers. And so did the court. The preliminary injunction was granted that afternoon. Our public dissolution was frozen. Mercer Council looked physically ill. Lucasta looked murderously calm. Dahlia looked bored, which is what frightened women with old money often call panic when they are raised too expensively to show it. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited in a wet, bright line. Noor stepped to the microphones first. She said, "No spouse should be turned into a reputational disposal mechanism." Then she stepped back and let me decide. For one frightening second, I almost said nothing. Old instincts. Hide, endure, go home. Then I remembered there was no home waiting for me except the one I built myself. So I said, clearly, what happened to me was not a private heartbreak. It was a public strategy. And women like me are done being strategy. That clip ran everywhere. Mercer's stock fell again. Lucasta launched a private reconciliation campaign so transparent it would have been funny if it were not insulting. Her office offered mediated settlement, discreet compensation, non-disclosure protections, an opportunity to move forward with dignity. Noor sent the offer back with one sentence. Dignity was not what your client offered at the gala. The full trial took 4 months. It was the longest season of my life, and also the one that made me. In those months, Rowan Copy reopened properly. Not because I had planned it, because women started coming. First for updates, then for help. An Omega teacher whose mate's family tried to void her housing rights after a private separation. A beta mother fighting a custody clause buried in a domestic trust. An alpha daughter who wanted to dissolve an arranged bond without sacrificing her inheritance. They came because my case was public, and because public shame has a strange side effect. It lights little lamps in women who thought they were alone. I started using the front counter again, then the back room, then the side shelves. Mina joked that I was turning my grandmother's copy shop into a rebellion with office supplies. I answered, "Good." Paper remembers. She laughed so hard, she snorted coffee through her nose. Noor came by often, at first for casework, then for tea, then because, I think, she liked the quiet. She was not an easy woman. That is not an insult. I mean, she did not perform ease. She moved with a kind of deliberate steadiness that made the room around her calm or anxious, depending on who needed what from truth. She was beautiful in a severe way. Dark brown skin, sharp mouth, hands that never fidgeted, a voice low enough to settle my pulse when court prep made my scent go acrid. I did not notice when admiration turned warm. I only noticed that I slept better on nights after she had been in the shop. The trial itself was brutal. Mercer counsel tried to paint me as reactive, vindictive, humiliated beyond reason. Noor dismantled them with terrifying patience. Each time they tried to reduce me to emotional fallout, she placed another document into evidence. Board minutes, donor call summaries, internal advisory notes. Dahlia's scheduling overlap with Vivienne's public appearances. A draft press statement, never released, describing our dissolution as a necessary personal clarification aligned with executive continuity. Necessary personal clarification. There is a kind of evil only consultants can write. The worst day of the trial came when Lucasta took the stand. She testified with the serene confidence of a woman who had never once imagined consequence belonging to her. She called her actions stewardship. She called the gala unfortunate but efficient. She called me a young wife overwhelmed by pressure beyond her social range. I nearly left the courtroom. Noor touched 2 fingers lightly against my sleeve beneath counsel table. Grounding. Permission without command. I stayed. Then Noor stood and asked Lucasta 3 questions that changed the whole case. Did you know the dissolution had not been discussed with Selah Rowan before Founders' Night? Yes. Did you recommend a public setting because it would limit her ability to respond privately before narrative control was established? A pause. Yes. Did you regard her emotional distress as an acceptable cost? Lucasta lifted her chin. Yes. There are moments when a case stops being complicated. That was one. After that, everything became only time. Vivienne's final testimony nearly undid me. Not because she defended herself. Because she didn't. She admitted she had chosen the board over me. She admitted she had believed she could stabilize the damage and explain later. She admitted Dahlia was useful. She admitted she knew public humiliation would weaken my position. Noor asked, "Why do it that way if you loved your wife?" Vivienne answered, "Because I thought if I handled the destruction quickly enough, I could come back for what remained." My heart did something ugly and old at that sentence. Not forgiveness. Recognition. That was exactly who she was. A woman who mistook tactical control for love. The judge took 3 weeks to rule. They were 3 of the longest weeks of my life. Rowan Copy stayed busy. Mina slept on my couch twice because she said if I paced any harder, the floorboards would file a complaint. Noor started bringing dinner without asking whether I had eaten. Always practical things. Soup, rice bowls. Once, unexpectedly, little plum tarts from a bakery 2 districts away, because she overheard me tell a client my grandmother used to buy them after difficult hearings. That nearly broke me more than the trial had. Kindness after control feels like sunlight after fluorescent poison. When the ruling came, Courtroom 7 was full again. Noor sat beside me in navy, Mina on my other side with her lucky mechanical pencil between both hands. Vivienne sat ahead with counsel. Lucasta did not attend. Cowardice has etiquette. The judge read for 36 minutes. Most of it legal framework, power imbalance, documented intent, public coercion, material harm, weaponized reputational exposure. Then came the sentence that split my life into before and after. This court finds that the petitioner's conduct constituted deliberate public degradation executed for strategic corporate benefit, rendering the dissolution process coercive, inequitable, and legally tainted from inception. My whole body went cold. Not because I was losing, because I was not. The judge continued. The dissolution filed at Founders' Night was voided. Damages were awarded. Mercer Holdings was referred for independent labor compliance review. Lucasta Mercer's communications to the board were entered into a regulatory ethics complaint. And most importantly, the ruling established judicial precedent that public humiliation used to manipulate a spouse's legal posture could be treated as coercive conduct in dissolution proceedings. Precedent. Noor's first question. Not revenge. Precedent. I looked at her and saw the smallest smile at the corner of her mouth. Mina grabbed my hand so hard my knuckles cracked. Across the aisle, Vivienne closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just once, like a woman finally hearing the shape of what she had done, in a voice that was no longer her own. Outside the courthouse, the city lost its mind. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed. Someone from the Omega Rights Coalition actually cried into a scarf. Mina said something obscene about Lucasta Mercer and judicial gravity. Noor only said, "That is one of the most elegant acts of redistribution I've ever heard." The press wanted tears. I gave them steadiness. "The law has memory now," I said. "That matters more than my anger." But I was angry. God, I was angry. I was also free. Not cleanly, not romantically. Freedom after coercion is not a sunrise. It is a lock turning, a filing stamped, a door you can close without asking permission from the woman who used to own the key. Vivienne came to Rowan Copy 2 days later, not with flowers, not with apologies rehearsed into sound bites. She came alone, in a dark coat, and set her umbrella by the door, like any ordinary woman who had to come in out of the rain. That was almost insulting. I was in the back room, relabeling archive trays. Mina saw her first and raised one brow at me. "Your ex-wife is here to discover consequences." I went out front, slowly. Vivienne stood in the middle of the shop, gaze fixed on the brass paper cutter my grandmother had polished every Sunday. Her face had changed in the weeks since the ruling. Not softened, made honest by damage. "What do you want?" I asked. She looked at me then, and for a moment, I saw the woman from courtroom 3. The one who crouched beside my spilled files and noticed I sorted by appellate support instead of subject. Maybe that made it worse. "Nothing you owe me," she said. "That narrows the options." A tiny, almost smile touched her mouth and vanished. "I came to return something." She took an envelope from her coat and set it on the counter. I did not touch it. "What is it?" "The deed." "To what?" "Your building. I bought it from the estate 6 months ago." I stared at her. Rowan Copy had technically still been operating under a holding structure after my grandmother's death. I knew the estate was messy. I did not know Vivienne had bought the property. She kept going before I could speak. "I intended to transfer it to you after the gala as part of the settlement package." I laughed once. It sounded terrible. You were going to publicly destroy me and privately gift me my own grandmother's building? Yes. She did not look away. That was the kindest version of my plan. The honesty of it hurt more than a lie would have. It always had. Vivienne reached into her coat again, slower this time, and set down a second document. The freehold is clean now. No lien, no family trust, no Mercer claim. I looked at the papers, then at her. Why? She was silent so long that I thought she would leave without answering. Finally, she said, "Because if I do one decent thing without trying to use it to reopen your life, I would like it to be this." That almost undid me. Not because it won me back, because it was the first truly decent thing she had offered that did not hide a lock inside it. My voice came out rough. I am not coming back. I know. I mean in any form. Not later, not privately. Not when Lucasta dies, not when the company falls apart. Not after you spend 3 years doing charity work by the sea and discover conscience. Her mouth trembled, only slightly. Again, I knew where to look. I know. I believed her. That was the final cruelty. I still believed her when she spoke plainly. I took the deed. Not her hand, not her apology. The deed. Nothing more. I did love you, I said. Vivienne's face changed in a way I will remember until I die. Not hope. Never hope. Only grief wearing gratitude like a bruise. I know. And I begged, I added quietly, just not at the gala. She inhaled sharply. Good. Let that land where the judge's voice already lived. I know that too, she whispered. We stood there in the smell of paper and rain and old machines for what felt like the length of a second life. Then Vivienne nodded once. I won't come again. You shouldn't. She left without touching anything else. The bell over the door gave its tired little chime. I locked it behind her. Then I stood with both hands on the wood and breathed until the room stopped moving. Mina appeared in the doorway between front and back, took one look at my face, and handed me tea. Did she beg? No. Shame. I smiled into the steam, a real smile this time. Not really. The building transfer changed everything. With damages from the ruling and the deed in my name, Rowan Copy stopped being a relic and became a future. Mina helped me gut the back rooms and turn the second floor into legal resource offices. Noor handled the nonprofit filings when I decided the city needed a women's documentation clinic more than another boutique stationery space. We kept the front half as a records shop because my grandmother would have haunted me otherwise. The back became Rowan House. Records, legal literacy, contract review, emergency documentation for women in crisis, court prep nights, archival restoration classes for beta teens who wanted trade skills without debt. The first sign went up in green and gold 6 months after the ruling. Rowan House. Documents, dignity, defense. Mina hated the alliteration and adored the result. Opening day came in spring. The windows shone. The shelves were full. The old copy machines had been replaced by quiet new printers, but I kept my grandmother's brass stapler on the front desk because some symbols deserve survival. Women came, at first cautiously, then steadily. An Omega florist with a landlord trying to void her lease because her bond ended. A beta mother fighting a discriminatory school board. A young alpha ashamed to admit her family had tried to write her future spouse into an asset schedule. We helped them all. Not because we were saints, because no one should have to learn the law only after the woman she loved weaponized it. The first time a client called me Ms. Rowan with something like awe in her voice, I nearly looked over my shoulder for the woman I used to be, the one who thought being chosen by power was the same as becoming powerful herself. She was gone. Good. She deserved rest. Noor stayed, not in a dramatic way. She simply became part of the architecture of my new life. She came by after hearings to borrow the quiet. She stayed late to help draft intake forms. She knew exactly when to leave me alone and exactly when to set a bowl of soup by my elbow and say, "You've had enough caffeine to soothe your own bloodstream." There was no performance in her care, no hovering, no claiming, no curated intensity. She asked. She listened. She waited for answers instead of building them on my behalf. I did not trust it at first. How could I? Women like Vivienne leave you suspicious of competent affection. But Noor never rushed my fear. She never treated my caution like a flaw to be overcome. When I went silent, she left space. When I bristled, she did not punish. When I flinched at kindness, she did not retreat into pride. She simply remained, presence without pressure. I did not know how hungry I had been for that until my body stopped bracing every time she entered a room. One summer evening, nearly a year after the ruling, a storm rolled over Halcyon while we were cataloging donated case files upstairs. Rain hammered the windows. The lights dipped once and returned. I stood on a stool reaching for a top-shelf box and lost my balance when the thunder cracked. Noor caught my waist before I hit the floor. Just like that. Firm, steady. Nothing dramatic. My breath snagged. Her hands stayed exactly where they needed to. No further. "Got you," she said. 2 words. No possession inside them. I looked down at her, and something old and knotted in my chest loosened all at once. Not because I was falling for her. Because I realized I no longer felt afraid when an alpha held me. That was healing in its purest form. Not forgetting, not forgiving indiscriminately. Feeling my own body choose safety again. I climbed down from the stool slowly. Noor released me at once. Then she took the box from the shelf herself, because she was 6 inches taller and much less stubborn than I wanted to admit. "You looked heroic for a second there," she said. "I am heroic." "You were 2 inches from dying on a municipal records shelf." "Dramatic women survive by inches." That made her laugh. Her laugh was rare enough to feel like treasure. I found myself wanting it again. That realization startled me more than the almost fall had. On the anniversary of the gala, I held an event in Rowan House. Not a fundraiser, not a revenge party. A legal education night. Free tea, open chairs, printed guides on coercive dissolution, inheritance protection, and strategic public humiliation as civil harm. Mina said only I would throw a healing event with a title that sounded like a threat. She wasn't wrong. The room was full. Noor stood near the back in navy with one hand around a ceramic cup and the other tucked into her pocket, watching me with that calm, impossible gaze that made me feel seen instead of assessed. I spoke for 40 minutes, about paper, about record trails, about how quickly love can become administration when the wrong women are allowed to define it. I told them this. Power does not become intimate just because it calls you beloved. Read everything, even the women who kiss your forehead. The room went silent. Then a few women laughed softly. Then one started crying. Then another. Not from sadness, from recognition. Afterward, when the last chairs were stacked and the last brochures straightened, Noor helped me carry the empty tea urn to the back sink. She set it down and said, "You are very good tonight." I turned on the faucet and let hot water run over porcelain. "You say that like you expected less." "I say it like I know what it costs to speak from scars instead of hiding them." I looked at her, really looked. The controlled hands, the beautiful, tired face, the patience she had never once used against me. "What do you do?" I asked quietly, "when you finally stop waiting for an old life to reopen?" Noor dried her hands on a towel and came to stand beside me, not touching, just near. "You build one that doesn't have a locked door in it." It was such a Noor answer that I laughed, softly this time. She watched my face with careful warmth. Then she said, "For whatever it's worth, Selah, you already did." Maybe that should have been the moment I kissed her. Instead, because happy endings are strongest when they earn their way forward, I asked, "Would you like to have dinner with me on Friday?" Noor blinked once, only once. Then the corner of her mouth lifted. "I would like that very much." It rained on Friday, not dramatically, just enough to make the windows of the little dumpling restaurant glow amber against the street. Noor arrived exactly on time in a dark green coat that made her skin look warmer and her eyes softer. We ate too much, talked too long, argued cheerfully over whether legal footnotes counted as intimate reading. When we stepped outside, the rain had thinned to mist. She walked me back to Rowan House because apparently some gestures remain beautiful even when they are simple. At the door, under the green and gold sign my grandmother would have adored, Noor asked, "May I kiss you?" I did not know a woman could ask that gently without making it feel fragile. I said yes. Her hand came to my jaw with exquisite care. The kiss was warm, sure, and free of conquest. No urgency, no claim, no strategy. Just a beginning honest enough to stand in the open. When it ended, I laughed against her mouth because happiness sometimes arrives sounding ridiculous after so much damage. Noor smiled into the space between us. "I like that sound." "Good," I said. "You're going to hear it often." That is the part no one tells the women in the ruined middle of their stories. The good part is not always a return. Sometimes it is not a return at all. Sometimes the real happy ending is a building with your name on it. Women inside who no longer feel alone. Legal papers in the right drawers. Your own key warm in your own hand. And a new alpha at your door who asks instead of assumes. 6 months later, Rowan House expanded into the lot next door. A year later, we added a free records clinic upstairs. 2 years later, little girls came in with their mothers and grew up around contract tables instead of whispers. Lucasta Mercer lost her board influence and retreated to a quieter kind of cruelty, where fewer women cared what she thought. Dahlia Kestrel married a donor heiress in another city, where no one knew how quickly she had folded under oath. Vivienne never ran for the council judiciary seat again. I heard she took a regional compliance post, far from the city, and spent most of her time rebuilding flood records for villages that had lost everything in one season. I hope she did the work well. I also hope it hurt. Both can be true. Sometimes, on cold mornings before Rowan House opens, I go upstairs to the records room and unlock the file cabinet with the brass key I wear around my neck. In the bottom drawer sits the original dissolution petition from the gala, the court verdict, and the first funding deed for Rowan House. I keep them together because I am my grandmother's granddaughter, and I know paper remembers. I look at those documents and think of the woman I was under the chandeliers, barefoot inside blue silk, humiliated, furious, too alive to disappear. She thought the worst thing in the world had happened to her. She did not know she was 30 steps away from the life that would save her. That life did not begin when the judge spoke. It began when I stopped asking powerful women to explain why they hurt me and started making rooms where they could not. The alpha who humiliated me in public was not ready for the judge's verdict. She was even less ready for what came after. My name over the door. My work in the city. My laughter in rooms where I used to shrink. My happiness. That was the part she could never appeal. And that is where this story ends. Not with a knock at my door. Not with an unfinished confession. Not with a promise to meet again someday. It ends with Rowan House full, the tea still warm, Noor laughing in the next room, and me exactly where Lucasta Mercer never wanted an omega like me to stand. At home, in public, unafraid, and loved the right way at last.